other than Caroline Kell, and she joins us live to air right now. Good morning, Caroline.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. What a great way to start the Friday, brother.
You feeling it?
Feeling it. That track really got me in the feels.
Good.
Thank you. I'm just loving what you're doing.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. It's great to have people like you on and Al, and hearing just different voices and stuff. It's super important. But it's been a big week here, so I'm rapt to finish the week of mental health with you. How are you this week? How's your week been?
Week is a bit like life at the moment. Checkered with some good and bad. Had some really great clients and some really great milestones this week. But have a bit of a sick dog which I'm tending to at the moment. So yeah, the pooch. I know.
Is he in that hammock? He's in that hammock behind you?
No, he would love to be though. He would absolutely love to be if I'd let him. But yeah, the OG fur baby is not well. So yeah, bit of up, bit of down, but like super excited to be here and just I'm loving what you're doing, brother. Nothing kind of makes me happier than watching our mob do things that fill them up. So I love this space and so excited to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, cool. I've got you on because you have spent some time in the wellness, health, mental health, wellbeing space, whatever you like to call it. Tell us a little bit about your journey in terms of mental health, maybe just personally, and then what led you to bring on Black Waddle Coaching.
Totally. It's like kind of a loaded question, isn't it? I think, did I choose mental health or did it kind of choose me? I think, personally, I think as a kid, I guess I've always really had a deep fascination about people and societies and what makes us good and well as humans and makes us cooperators. I grew up with a big Black blended family. There's 5 siblings. I was the second youngest. And I guess, we had a really, lively childhood, I guess. My mum, Elsa, Kell, was taken from my Nana Rini and her 11 kids, one of 11, taken when she was 10 years old, put into an orphanage. And I think growing up, she shared some really horrific stories of, beatings and brutality and sexual violence. And, it was a really tough time for her kind of growing up. She was taken and then put in an orphanage in Rockhampton and then fostered out into a non-Aboriginal family. And, I think some of those experiences left, immense scars on her as a person. She did what most blackfellas did at the time and fled in the 70s and came down to Kulin Lands here in Melbourne and grew up in Preston. And I guess, growing up, we lived in a street called Stoke Street. It was an all-black kind of institution in Preston. It was pretty good times in the 90s. And I think I just watched a lot of dysfunction, a lot of drinking, a lot of violence, and a lot of, an inability to, as brother was saying, a framework to express our emotions. We just we couldn't draw on those. And so, what I saw was thinking to myself, well, there's got to be another way, this can't be the only way to drink it up and bottle it down and fight it out and so on. So, I at 20, I thought, I'm going to go learn how to deal with my emotions. And went to uni and did a Bachelor in Social Science, majored in counselling and just loved learning about it, loved learning about the brain and realizing that, our emotions can get the better of us, but when we kind of are informed, and I just loved it, loved learning, getting that knowledge around it. And then, ended up working clinically as a drug and alcohol counsellor pretty young. I probably needed to do a bit of my own work, a bit more healing myself. And then, so clinically, I haven't worked clinically for about 5 or 6 years, but spent a time working in drug and alcohol counselling at Turning Point. And I think I saw the same cycles repeated with like our stories are also similar. I mean, we all have your own unique experience, but I just saw a lot of people falling through the cracks and not enough support and really crisis driven and reactionary and really at that kind of clinical intervention and not really sort of supporting people with preventing them from getting out of the system. And often with drug and alcohol, once you present, you're just insidiously in this cycle of relapse and so forth. So yeah, I made the leap and thought, I'm going to go help at the reform level, not so much on the clinical space. And found myself working for government and working on some really cool reforms around mental health. And did that for about 6 years or 5 years and have worked in Aboriginal affairs in various kind of leadership roles before, starting my business, Black Wattle Coaching and Consulting, which is like a culmination of all the things.
Yeah.
I love what I get to do now and the freedom and that's me, I guess.
Awesome. How does it translate, going to uni, scrubbing up on your skills, going out there in a white space? How does it translate back? How do you interpret it back? Is there anything? Was there anything helpful? Because a lot of black fellas resist anything that comes from that space, but not if it comes from one of their mob that goes out, grabs it, and brings it back. And that's what a lot of mob do, is they go out to uni, especially I know a fair few stories of mob leaving family. It's so heart-wrenching. They skill up, you call it that, but then come back and present it in the way that it's right. How hard was it to grab things that you were learning, and was it all rosy coming back going, I've got some answers? People, I don't think it would be great.
No, I mean, I guess that I'll answer it in kind of two parts. I think uni in and of itself is, an empirical system where it's about elitist and so forth. And so I never really felt that I fitted in uni. I mean, I really wanted to learn and I've always enjoyed learning about things because I've always believed that there's got to be another way. And I've just never wanted to believe that we have to stay in suffering. I just thought there's got to be another way. And it's interesting. Like you go to uni and you learn like about psychology and the brain, and it's just like the classic white man who's like sitting and thinking and philosophizing about the world. And you hear that it's just all white dudes and their thoughts about us. And I'm thinking, even this isn't right. But they're the modalities that we learn, and they're the kind of pioneers of psychology, your Freuds and your Carl Jungs and so forth. And again, I just thought, I don't know, I'm not buying it. So, of course, I needed some of that science and understanding about how the discourse works. But I think what really struck me is that, the way that Aboriginal people, we are the first doctors and the first scientists. Yeah. And we have cared deeply for one another in a reciprocal exchange for, since millennia. And our health and well-being is circle. It's interrelated. And in fact, the way that we define through our health and well-being is not just the physical absence of disease. It's how well that we can spiritually, emotionally connect with each other, our emotions, our culture, our kin. We have many things in our toolkit that makes us this holistic health model. And I feel that in the last 18 months, a lot of the ways that we have tended to do things in that kind of cyclical social emotional wellbeing approach is becoming the way that medical health is looking at how people are happy and functioning as well. This community-based health response, it's a way that we've always done things. So I think that First Nations knowledge around mental health is really good for everyone. And I love that I can take a bit of this and take a bit of that, take a bit of science, Western science, but also make that stronger through our holistic ways and our ways of knowing, being, doing, which is so sophisticated and nuanced. But to come back, I mean, it's interesting. So there's 5 kids in my family, and we've all sort of had our own struggles with mental health and addictions and we could have easily waved it off ourselves like mum. But it's really fascinating. We're all in the helping professions. And that's not coincidence. My brother, Daniel Wilson, love you, bruz. He's he's worked at Odyssey House as one of the senior Aboriginal clinicians there for maybe about 10 years. My sister, similarly so. My brother's at Rumballara. So we're all sort of just helpers in some weird way. And I think it's just an extension of watching a lot of dysfunction growing up. So they're pretty stoked, and we all get to kind of, talk about our emotions in a much more meaningful way instead of just, bottling them up and drinking them down and all that jazz. So
yeah. Oh, communications is key, isn't it? It's we all do it differently, and it's great. It's interesting that your whole family's kind of on a similar path. It must be something in the background there. I talk about trying to connect the gap, the white fellas and the black fellas, and without talking about the differences, because I've talked about that quite often. Go, what's some things that we can really help white fellas understand? Let's talk about the similarities in the mental health space. Let's do the opposite, because we can easily commentate, and I think sometimes non-Indigenous people can commentate and go, "Oh, that's really cool. I might help. I know some Indigenous people too that I'm going to pass this on to," instead of going, "This is something that I could probably use myself." What are the similarities? What are we on the same page? Where are we at on the same page as just a human race?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I guess I kind of answered a couple of ways. Last year, during COVID and Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of unrest, I was working at the Victorian Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation. And we, through the Royal Commission into Mental Health, were able to go and have some yarns with mob. And we thought, look, no one's going to want to come and chat with us during that year, during the health anxieties, extreme racism. And it was interesting. We asked a lot of the mob, what do they want? What do they want to see? And it was interesting that most of them wanted a combination, I guess, a hybrid approach of both Western support and our way of culture. They saw them both in blending when they were blended to see much more benefits. I think somewhere along the lines, I think they feel that if we just kind of sprinkle a little bit of culture, that people will be living happy, fulfilled lives. And culture is absolutely a protective factor to stop you, because once we are comfortable in our identity and we're strong in who we are, we're able to navigate life stresses a bit better. But it certainly doesn't stop a really acute or chronic health condition. So if you need to go and see a GP, a counsellor, have a mental health care plan, and so forth. So I guess just debunking the myth that culture fixes all. And we do need a combination of the two. And when they work in a bit of harmony, we tend to yield better results. So, so there are a lot of similarities. I mean, the Western models of mental health looks at things like our thoughts control our emotions, and that those emotions control our behaviours. And that's similarly what we talk about with social emotional wellbeing. I think there's been a myth in science for a long time that we are thinking creatures who occasionally feel, but we're actually opposite. We're feeling creatures who occasionally think, and sometimes our thoughts just overwhelm us, I guess. So we do have a lot of similarities in how we deal with things, but I think this hybrid approach where we look a bit more upstream at building strong families and communities at that sort of primary early intervention end, we see much better results in mental health.
Wow.
Yeah. But there's benefit, of course, in working together. I mean, also too, in right now, particularly with the Victorian Aboriginal community, our health workers who are doing such a great job, shout out to all of them, are tired. And so we have to have a pop-up or a surge in workforce supports, and it will require us to come together to work together through that. And I guess there's also this kind of conversation when you talk about Aboriginal knowledge that it discredits white ways of thinking. But it's really it's not to say that one is better or less than. It's just to say that when we look at First Nations science and we value First Nations science, that together it's a pretty sophisticated way of solving some wicked problems.
Do you think there's a little issue of defensiveness? We talked a little bit about this with David Kelly, who we had on 2 days ago, and Enneagram program, and he opened up the chat talking about how we need to just we need to acknowledge that we've got a defensive person and we've got a real person, and we tend to present our defensive nature a lot too often, and quite often we don't deal with the defensive person. That's a good way to read someone, is what you're getting off someone. It's their defensive nature first, but deep down they're someone else. Is that the same kind of thing from a very macro level in terms of white culture accepting? It's like, hey, I'm not used to having another option here, and we get a bit defensive. Yeah. Do we have a defensive society in this way, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
at the heart we're good. At the heart we're good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I sort of think about things, and this is through some formal teachings over my life, is, how we define the problem is how we define the solution, and the language around the problem. And so I think when somebody comes at something with a defense mechanism, it's generally a fear-based response, and that person needs a bit more extra love and compassion. And similarly, so with maybe at a macro level, I think it's just, and so thinking about the difference around how we define problems is how we define solutions. I think it's just different. Like in a Western society, in a very patriarchal, monolithical way, discovery was really important. Discovering land, discovering resources, Nobel Bell Peace Prizes, and having that kind of status within society was about discovery. Whereas for our mob, we like to, where we have watched and observed, and that we've watched this landscape, and we did things not for discovery or for accolades or titles, but for the benefit of the entire community, for the love of everybody. Where it's just a different way that we're much more of a reciprocal people. Whereas, in Western science or Western way of thinking, it's about, this discovery, scientists hypothesizing and then discovering something. Where for us, it's about what can we do to benefit us all. And I think there's just a different way that we approach things, I guess. I mean, it's even like there's some behavioral scientists that I've spoken to, Arnie Nola, Turner, Jensen. She's saying with our mob, there's a science is why, how when someone becomes like a bit of a big shot or a big show, and we kind of tear them down and we're like, hey, you've got to get back down here. There's a science in that, because when we lived in harmonious tribal living, if you were too cocky and going out, you'd get them all killed. So we pull you back into the tribe and say, hey, pull up, you've got a responsibility here. And that's how we still right now are hardwired. When someone gets a bit too big for them, for the shots, we get pulled up and critiqued and held to account, because if you were too out there, you put all the mob at risk. And so I guess that's just how we do things. We do things for the collective, whereas Western is very, discovery, hyper individualization, and, it's about status generally. So, I don't know. It's a bit of a tangent, that one.
Yeah, no, it's great. You got some great comments coming in on the chat here too. Kyle, I absolutely love and agree with Caroline's words. Whenever I feel trapped in the Western model of mental health work, messages like yours right now remind me that I don't have to do things that way. So thanks for that reminder. Let's talk about Black Wattle coaching, leadership and mindset stuff. You do speaker and facilitator, a few hats, getting out there and then coming back in and spending time with people. What's Black Wattle coaching about?
Yeah, so Black Wattle coaching and consulting was kind of birthed again out of my own lived experience. Last year, after our first major wave in the pandemic, I was an executive director at a health organisation, just come off, extensive COVID-19 response, and before that, really playing a pretty key role in the treaty process here. And I hadn't really looked after myself as I intended, and hit a bit of a burnout period, and just decided to really go back into the deep healing work. So I guess this is my new baby. It's an 11-month-old business. I get the privilege of working with Aboriginal leaders and executives, and the term leader in our community feels a bit foreign sometimes, but sure. I think we're all leaders in our own right. I mean, Aboriginal people are kind of inherently entrepreneurial in their thinking. We're so resourceful. We've had to be. So yeah, I get to work with a lot of execs, a lot of companies around, similarly before, about how people can safely express their emotions in the workplace. I think we've come a really long way of how we look at emotions. It was back in the 80s under the Mental Health Care Act that people were locked up for experiencing, in asylums and so forth. So people still very on guard in the workplace. And so I guess I help people be courageous and vulnerable and show empathy and compassion. That's most of what I get to do. I work with execs around understanding their personal values, their stories, how that impacts their leadership style. Also get to clarify, their goals as individuals and how they want to show up every day for themselves. So I guess I take a pretty holistic approach, trauma-informed, working with, leaders or people who are just doing some pretty awesome things in their everyday to get some extra skills and tools in their toolkit. Sorry. I read kind of it in a nutshell.
It's great. And I know we're very jam-packed with time, and it's. I'm going to put up all the links to your beautiful, cool website. I'm also going to put up an article as well that you recently wrote, and you just touched on it then about burnout, and it's felt differently by First Nations women. Tell us about Simone Biles.
Yeah, well, I think, this really touches on this mental health and how far we've come as a society, and recognising that, dark times are inevitable, and it's how long those periods last and how we go about them. But Simone Biles has shown immense courage. As a Black woman, sometimes we are sort of conditioned, if you will, to prioritise the needs of others and to have some sort of moral obligation. Most of us are trying to make ourselves really small or shift and augment to sort of show up and be seen. And so Simone Biles kind of represents a really staunch woman who said no on a global stage. But I got asked to write a piece around burnout, and I think Black Wattle, a lot of what I do in working with Black women is around managing and understanding burnout. Burnout is kind of characterised as this feeling of emotional depletion that is generally caused from unsafe interpersonal relationships in the workplace. So, microaggressions, tokenism, all of those things will fast track your experience to burnout. And I was actually, as part of the article, I got the chance to speak to Aunty Nola about some work that she was doing. And she told me some staggering stories about Aboriginal people who tend to have, on average, over 50 people that they are responsible for, whether that's emotionally and even financially. And I thought, 50, come on. And then I just did a little mind map of my own family. And, when you look at kids and kin and boards and all the non-traditional roles outside of the 9 to 5, it starts to stack up. So I wrote this piece around burnout because I just thought, you know what, I can tell people how to self-soothe and to, flex their muscles and say no. But if the water that they're drinking from is sick and is toxic, then they're going to get crooked. And I think that workplaces really need to do more when they're thinking about burnout, particularly for First Nations communities, particularly after our health workers have spent 2 years working in this kind of state of fight or flight in a COVID response. And I think that it really takes all of us to look at burnout and the role that we play to make sure that people feel safe at work and to be themselves at work.
Describe burnout. Burnout is something that usually surprises people. Hey, it's like, whoa, where'd that come from? But it's not. This has been building up. It's usually a lot longer and deeper than when we finally see it. And burnout's just the visible sign or the extreme. But the burnout usually involves hiding things and not just trickling out when it's needed. But you talk about, I read this thing in your article, burnout costs Australian workplace on average 14.81 billion per year in stress-related incidents and absenteeism. That is out of control. That is actually out of control.
Yeah, and I think workplaces don't really have the maturity often to deal with that.
I agree.
You know, the workplaces in itself, you know, you always have to go back to go forward, and this kind of this idea of grossly overworking and it somehow being like sexy and cool and Wolf of Wall Street is just so hardwired in us as human beings.
Yeah, so good.
It's like, you know, if to look at it, you have to sort of go back to the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution coincided with periods of colonization. And so this idea of like grossly overworking and accumulating more and more wealth and being more and more in the pecking order within society is become the norm. And workplaces will exploit that because they want you to perform, right?
Yeah.
So they want output. And so, you know, I think, as I say, with mental health, where we're starting to open up the discourse, people like Simone Biles and Naomi can say, hey, this is my needs. But workplaces, I think, are really starting to, I think they really need to understand burnout. So burnout's been around since the 70s. It was coined in the 70s, but not a lot has been done because of the way in which people work. And so, yeah, it's a complex issue. But I think, it just requires us to take more things into account instead of just looking for easy answers. And that's where it gets hard for workplaces, I think.
Yeah, sure. Like they, like it's too big, so they kind of shift it down the chain. We'll do something at the end of the year, maybe in the annual review, we'll bring in some kind of PD days that work a bit better. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's right. And like, to your other point about like how it kind of shows up, I mean, like everything, like mental health, there's no one size fits all, but there are some common characteristics when it comes to burnout. And most commonly, it's like really long periods of cynical, like, you know, thinking what's the point, losing that kind of drive. So it starts at that sort of like really cynical, withdrawn sort of period. But then, you know, it can really manifest as chronic health conditions in the body. You know, some of the most recent evidence in the last couple of years around burnout has sort of looked at it as trapped emotions that aren't able to get out of the body.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it can show up, you know, it can affect anxiety, depression, libido. You know, it can be really far reaching. And I think the thing I will say is that when people do hit burnout, it's really hard physically to get back from that. It's not like I'll go and have a bubble bath and a weekend away and I'm feeling ready to be good on a Monday morning.
Yeah,
It's treatment and it's work. And so I think it's about recognizing the signs before we hit burnout, before we get to that real chronic end where, like any chronic health condition, needs really intensive wraparound support. So if you're noticing that you're feeling really cynical, withdrawn, you know, the things that used to give you drive and passion at work are no longer, or you keep just having to deal with unsafe interpersonal relationships, you know, that really jerk boss who makes you feel really, that over time can erode your confidence and erode and become a burnout. So I think it's just understanding that it's many things, and that ultimately the responsibility does sit with all of us and workplaces to do a bit more. Yeah.
I remember when I was getting a bit of business advice when I was starting my cafe many moons ago, and someone was telling me about, you know, just this hill and when do you start working, fixing your business? And, you know, a few of us, you know, well, clearly the chart says on the way down, they're like, no, you need to do it a lot earlier. You're too late. You're too late if you start noticing things when they're on the way down. And I think it's definitely something you're highlighting in my own life, connecting up those two stories and going, we need to get in way earlier, not seeing the decline and then start going at it. We need to be a lot more aware well before and acknowledge that there could be opportunities here which might fester and create bigger problems. So it's really, really beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Caroline, it's so good to have you. thank you so much for dealing with
Thank
my
you.
uncle brain. Telling you what day to come on, and you're so good. You're so
No,
good. I'm gonna
thank
I'm gonna
you.
put up your link to Black Wattle Coaching, and what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah,
Have you
I
got
mean, look,
things
you
going
can
on?
always black track me, you know, the old fashioned way, Facebook, Instagram. But yeah, just drop me a line. I'm always keen to have a yarn. But yeah, mostly on the socials.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you,
I love
brother. It's a great way to start the day. Loving what you're doing, and congrats on the 1K. And I hope that you get a few more dollars there.
We've got 20
Awesome
more bucks.
work.
We've got 20 more bucks. 20 more minutes, $20. I'm calling it.
Deadly.
Thanks so much for being our guest today and for finishing off the week in style. I love it. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah,
Take care.
No worries.
Bye.